To tonight's speaker, we are delighted to welcome farmer Clive Bright as our guest speaker. Clive is one of our Farming for Nature ambassadors from 2019. He has an organic beef farm in Ballymote, County Sligo, and he has a mix of traditional breeds which he sells directly to the consumer through his brand Rare Ruminare. Tonight, Clive will take us through his farming system that is helping both his animals thrive and enhancing the biodiversity on his land. So, Clive, thanks for joining us, and over to you. And yeah, we'll see you again in about 40 minutes.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be involved. I've really enjoyed all the other presentations, and thank you to yourself and Pranjali for inviting me along. So I'll start my sharing my presentation. So does that look okay?
Yeah, perfect, Clive. You're good to go.
Great stuff. Okay. Okay, so what I'm planning to do is waffle for about half an hour, just basically attempting to justify my obsession with planting trees and other things that have led me to really enjoy my job as a farmer. So just a little background first. I took over the family farm here from my mum in 2003 after spending 4 years in art college studying design. When I took it over, it was a dairy farm. We were milking 25 to 30 cows, and that was not an enterprise I had any interest in carrying on. So the first step was to change over to suckler farming. So after taking a few years to kind of shake off the legacy issues on the farm and just change the way things were always done a little bit towards what I wanted to do in the future, I did my Green Cert then, and for those of you who don't know, the Green Cert is a mandatory training for young farmers that we must endure, and it took me a while to shake that off as well, because kind of brainwashed with loads of stuff I had no interest in as well. But so I slowly started to forge an idea of what I wanted to do with the farm, and I knew I wanted to strive towards organic farming and just a more natural kind of farming. And basically, I wanted an aesthetically pretty farm that didn't have too much drudgery involved, and that there was plenty of time, and it was a nice space for family, and that it was profitable as well. So kind of a tall order, but in many ways it's not at all. So I farm here with my wife Shelley, and we have 2 kids, Ted and Emily, and so I just really wanted it to be a nice space, first of all. So I quickly realized that feeding tons of grain to conventional or kind of continental cattle and barely breaking even at the end of it wasn't really a model I wanted to pursue, and it didn't tick any of the boxes. So I started to tap into my design training, and I started kind of reevaluating all the inputs on the farm, because they seemed to be melting away any profit I was trying to make. And so I started questioning things like why we were feeding grain to cattle, first of all, and why I was breeding animals that required grain, why I was spending so much money on synthetic fertilizer. And grass grows itself, really, if you have enough patience and you manage it a little bit better. And things that habitual practices like spraying rushes really bug me, because I knew that spraying killed rushes for a wee while, but it didn't address the root cause of why the rushes were there in the first place. So after spending a few years experimenting with traditional cattle and managing my grazing a little bit better, I was confident that I could run the farm organically. So I signed up with the Organic Trust and I went into organic conversion. And within the first year, I realized that it kind of focused my mind really quickly because the price of organic grain is double that of conventional grain. So after that first year, I had completely cut out any meal feeding or grain feeding entirely. And I did that basically by I stopped feeding grain, and then I culled any animals that weren't doing well, just on the grass only diet. And yeah, so we were never very intensive, but cutting all those kind of agri-chemicals just kind of, hold on, my screen isn't moving. Cutting all those chemicals, agri-chemicals and inputs out, just kind of, the profit just started to show its face a little bit. But at the end of the day, we weren't really, sorry, I've thrown myself here. Oh, there we go. Okay. I've just lost my train of thought there. Yeah, so at the end of the day, even without all the expensive inputs and everything else, it kind of, I wasn't really good at the mart and the selling part of it. So I'd spend the whole year working really hard, and I'd end up and losing all my profit over one transaction. So that really annoyed me, that I was kind of a price taker. And so we moved along a little bit and I started exploring direct selling, and I set up a kind of direct sales business, the Rare Ruminare, and we sell all our finished animals through that avenue now. And really, it's just been great because we get to meet the customers, we get to follow the product through to the very end, and then we can focus completely on what we want to do and developing the genetics to increase the flavor profile of the meat, rather than trying to get massive cattle or all the other goals that you try and achieve if you're in the commodity market. So so that kind of is the basic outlay of the farm, and it's everything else behind that was just is constantly being tweaked. So the farm itself has lots of advantages. It's all in one parcel. It's 120 acres, and our house and farmyard are kind of just in the middle there. And it's on kind of middling to marginal land in a drumlin landscape, and the farm covers most of a drumlin hill and runs down to the surrounding lowland on the south here, where you see I've highlighted this brown area, and that is essentially peat, and it looks like this. So it's not the most productive patch, but it's got loads of drains and everything in it, and it grows a little bit of grass around the edges. But it's we run the cattle through there, but we try to be quite sensitive, and we don't push that land at all, because it just doesn't respond well to being pushed at all. So we top the rushes off a couple of times every year, and we bale them for bedding for the cattle. Then to the kind of northeast here, I've highlighted a yellow area, and that's probably the most dynamic habitat on the farm. It's a thurla. You can see from the satellite photo, it's still actually in flood there in that photograph. And the portion that we own there is highlighted in yellow, and it's very cool. It's really beautiful, and it attracts loads of migrating hooper swans and curlews and water hens and lots of different duck species, and then in the summertime it like makes the most incredibly diverse hay. It's really cool, and when you're mowing it, it's just in this lovely quiet basin, and there's like sparrowhawks flying around. It's just really cool, and we get to we have great fun in it. And if the weather is anyway nice in the wintertime, we have a little boat in the corner of the field, and gives the baling contractor a great giggle in the corner of the hayfield with this upturned boat. But so the rest of the land has a kind of deep mineral rich but a very heavy soil that's prone to compaction, and there's a lot of iron pan. So this is kind of my main limiting factor. And just for those of you who may not know, an iron pan is basically the iron gets leached out of the soil, especially during high rainfall, or just when the land is bare or a little bit mistreated, or it can be exacerbated by agrochemicals as well. But basically, that orange bit at the bottom is the iron, and it kind of doesn't really allow roots through that easily, and it can be impermeable to water, and it causes lots of problems. And above ground, really, where you get a lot of rushes, because above the iron pan, as you can see, this is kind of gray area, and that's just kind of waterlogged compaction in the soil. So it's not the healthiest place for roots to be, and it kind of limits the potential of the soil. Here's another hole. It's just a similar idea. I just dug this when I was planting trees last week, and you can just see the iron still in there. So when I cut the turf, that bit just flips up and comes away from the pan, and you have to beat down through the soil. And then once you get down, there's lovely soil underneath again. So there's loads of potential there, but at the moment we're only really farming that top layer. And because only that top layer is functioning, it leaves us really vulnerable to kind of waterlogging and drought, because the water isn't getting down properly to build up the kind of reserves in the soil, or getting away when there's heavy rainfall. So but despite this, to date we've been able to achieve a lot and increase the pasture diversity, and grow a lot of pasture-fed organic beef, even with the soil at this less than optimal kind of functional level. And that's just simply through improving our grazing management. So I practice holistic management, and part of that is mob-grazing. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on mob-grazing, because if I start talking about it, I won't really stop. But so basically, it's a rotational type of grazing with a long recovery period. So the cattle are in a paddock for a day, and then they move on to the next paddock. And the key thing about mob grazing is that you don't come back to that paddock again until the grass is fully recovered. And what I mean by fully recovered, as you can see here, is that the grass is at a time of year that can take 30 days, it can take 25 days, it can take 60 days, and throughout winter it could take 150 days. But so the aim is to manage the herd and manage the grazing and manage the size of the paddocks and the number of paddocks throughout the year, that you end up figuring out how not to regraze land grass that hasn't fully recovered. And so because the rotation is quite long, sometimes the grass gets very strong. Now, this is a little bit too strong. We aim to graze a little bit before this stage where everything goes to seed, but this kind of level of grazing doesn't really bother me either. And when we graze a paddock, we usually only graze 50% of the grass. We trample the rest, and that kind of feeds the soil, and there's loads of grass with potential to photosynthesize left behind, so it increases the rate that grass can recover. So it's the way we manage this is because the paddocks have to change size and a number all the time. It's just very simple infrastructure. It's all done with temporary electric fence. It's very easy to take up and take down and move around and change. And we have a kind of, and we have overground water pipes, and we pull a mobile water trough to paddocks so the cattle always have water. Let me see. Yeah, so the basic idea behind mob grazing is that you're mimicking the kind of the natural cycle of grass rejuvenation, and this is how grasses evolved together with herbivores over millennia. So by replicating this natural cycle, keeping livestock becomes a lot easier, and it becomes a lot cheaper, and you grow loads of high quality grass, and it increases the fertility and the diversity as you go. So I'm a huge advocate of mob grazing. It's worked really well for us, and I'm really happy with it. But as great as it is to date, it still hasn't really solved my compaction issues, and any improvements there have been very slow. Another limiting factor on the farm is that we have a lack of shelter in some areas. As you can see on this picture on the on the left, it's the hilltop of the top of the drumlin, and it's very exposed. So like we basically have to plan the grazings up there that it's not in inclement weather, because the cattle have no protection against strong wind or driving rain or anything like that. And we're doing our best to address all that. And historically, there actually wasn't that many field boundaries on the farm. The old maps don't show any wooded areas or any hedges really, and there were certainly some grubbed out in the 70s and the 80s, with the ones we have, and plant as many trees as we can. So we're and I'm doing my best to get in as much wooded area as well. So any little pocket I can, I've started planting. And it was thinking about planning where and what trees to plant around the farm that I observed a couple of things on the farm, and at the soil under and around established trees, and I noticed that it's quite different than the soil in the open pasture. And here's a couple of examples. So this is just the left photo there is along a hawthorn hedge in a field that's literally covered with rushes, and then there's this strip up along the side where there's no iron pan. The soil is brilliant underneath it, and it's totally down to the roots. On the right there's you can see you can almost inscribe a perfect circle around the little group of hawthorn there, where there's no rushes. And if you dig a hole there, I forgot to get a picture of it actually, but the soil is beautiful under there, and there's no iron pan. And if you move out into the field, then all the problems are back. So yeah, so I think trees have potential to solve all these problems. And this here is another field that I kind of accidentally repaired. So on the left hand side there, I fenced off that area because it was so bad and so swampy, and you couldn't even mow it or top it or anything. The tractor sunk there several times, and so I just fenced it off and decided I wasn't going to farm that area anymore. And I just planted a load of alder tree in it as a shelter belt for the field, and just to kind of use up the area that I was taking out of production. And to my surprise, it just completely reversed it, and now it's the best part of the field. It grows the most grass. It's just beautiful. And if I'd known what I was at the time, I would have fenced right up to the top of the rushes and spread the same number of trees all over it, and I'd have a fantastic field. But I'm going to make up for that now. I have another row of trees up running through the rushes I just planted this year, and basically from what I understand, the roots of the trees change the soil environment in profound ways. Firstly, the physicality of the powerful roots kind of open up and lift the soil. But the biology around those roots and the fungi and everything else change the chemistry of the soil to suit the tree species and other compatible plants. But plants that don't like that tree soil chemistry just will not grow there. And as it happens, rushes don't seem to like that tree soil chemistry. So this is kind of inspired me a little bit and given me the confidence to take this idea further. And so just as a side note, I have attempted mechanical means and with deep ripping and mold ploughing and improving drainage and everything else, and all the interventions were kind of hit and miss and short-lived and very expensive, and just they just don't seem to suit the farm and the soil type, and bringing in heavy tractors to drag machinery through it often causes more trouble than good. So I just think this tree idea is the one that's going to work for this farm. So so I've just started planting trees and trying to create sort of woodland pastures. And like, I'm a firm believer that farming for nature is it's not a philanthropic exercise. I see working with nature as a way to farm better, certainly, and easier, and ultimately more profitable. So you're just kind of harnessing and mimicking nature. So in nature, we look at animal species a lot, and we look at their natural habitats, and we look at what the niche or habitat is for livestock, cattle and sheep, really, in my case. I don't think it's really a manicured field or ryegrass with neat hedges, and neither is it a slatted shed. And in nature, wild cattle would have lived in kind of wooded pastures and with areas of scrub and some standard trees and some grass clearings. And that kind of natural habitat provides a whole range of dietary choices and shelter and shade. And I think the further more expenses involved. So I really see this as an exercise to farming in a more profitable way. The microclimate created under a wooded area like this, there's much less fluctuation than an open field, and in these times where weather patterns are becoming so much more extreme, and the advantage of having a habitat that buffers those extremities and those fluctuations through shelter and shade is going to reduce the stress on the animals, and it's going to increase their thrive. So it'll therefore be more profitable in that sense. In the silvopasture research site in Loughgall in Antrim, this microclimate has also been shown to increase the growing season at both ends of the year. So they've spaced out and thinned out the trees and managed them well enough that the mature trees aren't overshading the grass, so it has a minimal effect on the grass growth, and any effect it does have on the grass growth is mitigated by all the other benefits. The other huge benefit I see of having livestock with access to trees is browse, and browse is any green material that doesn't come from pasture plants, like leaves or green shoots of trees. So obviously exposing trees or livestock to trees must be well timed and for a short duration so the trees aren't damaged. But fast growing trees that coppice well, I think are especially useful. There's a recent study out in the UK from the Organic Research Centre showing that lambs that were given access to willow in April and May, it increased their thrive considerably because the willow had a really high concentration of cobalt, so it kind of satisfied their requirement for cobalt in their diet at a time when the cobalt and the grass was really low. So there was a side-by-side control of lambs that had no access to the cobalt and or no access to the willow, should I say. And the ones that had the willow and grass, as opposed to the ones that just had grass, did way better, killed out way better, finished way quicker. And so it's just having that range of kind of minerals and macro and micro minerals available to the animals, I think has a huge benefit for their general health and thrive. And yeah, it's just, again, it's more profitable. So a few strategies I've put in place for trying to get trees into fields. This is actually the same field I showed with that I repaired at the start with the alder. So I've mowed it to top the rushes, but also it's a really good way to find out where is a good place to plant trees, because one of the many decisions that you need to satisfy when planting trees is that they're not going to be in the way of machinery. I think for your own sake, and as well for the future safety of the trees, because if they're in the way, somebody in the future is just going to cut them down. So I find a really cool way to figure out if it's going to work nicely in the field is to mow the field, and that strip that's left in the middle is the perfect place to plant a row of trees, that last final strip. So you just don't mow that, and or you can mow it, plant the trees, but you'll never mow it again. And in this field is a kind of a wetter bottomy field, and what I've planted in here is willow, poplar and hazel, and I hope to manage these as this kind of short duration coppice. I'll coppice it down every 3 to 5 years, and let the cattle in. It should function. It should grow really quickly, and it should function as a kind of a shelter belt and a browse strip, so the cattle can have access to it when it reaches the stage where they're not going to do too much damage to it. And if they do damage to it, once the trees are established, you can just cut them down at the base and they'll all regrow again, and just put the fence back up. So the other thing I've kind of opted for, that actually this is just showing how I go about setting it up for planting as well. I go in with a mulching mower and skin the field just to get it right down to mark the area where I'm going to start planting the trees. Last year I used a heavy mulch, a wood chip, and I think this was probably, it worked nicely, kept the weeds down and everything, but it's a lot of expense for I think the gain, and I'm not sure it was quite worth it. But so on this right hand picture, I've been fencing out on the upper fields. Really, this is the same one that was on the right hand just yesterday. What I've done here is in the middle there's oak. These are kind of on the upper fields that aren't down in the peaty bottoms. There's oak and larch in the middle of this row, and it's about 80 meters long and it's 3 meters wide. And what I've done is planted pioneer trees around the edge, so there's quick growing birch and alder, and there's some willow and stuff around the edge as well. And the idea is that one fencing a big strip and a group of trees like this is quite efficient, and probably the cheapest way to establish trees, interpasture trees anyway. And what this kind of allows is that the pioneer trees kind of mimic a natural woodland succession. So they're basically nursing up the oak trees that are in the middle, but also the final vision here is that there will be maybe a standard oak every 20 meters, okay, up the middle of the row, and the larch will be harvested out for fence posts at some stage along the way, and but those pioneer trees will create that tree effect really quickly. So within 6, 7, 8 years, there'll be a nice stand of trees there with and hopefully having a negative effect on the rushes and a positive effect on everything else. And as the oaks grow up, and they'll take over the long-term role of that. So it's just creating this little mini ecosystem woodland thing. And I think the oaks will grow a lot faster in this. And kind of as a trial, I'm trying out these Catcus tree guards, and I have just single oaks planted in them, and I have rows of them planted as well with no pioneers around them, just as an experiment to see which one will come good. But I'm nearing the end now. So silvopasture is often pitched as a way to get 2 crops out of the same piece of land. For example, to grow timber, fruit, or nut trees while still utilizing the pasture underneath. And of course, this is possible, but for me on this farm, the priority is to use the trees to create a habitat for livestock and to restore the soil function, break up that iron pan, and have effective water cycling. And I think all those benefits will far outweigh having a second crop, which I could also do in the future, but I just want to focus on creating this habitat first of all. And just as a little side note, that's a meadow pippin nest, and I found that last summer after I had like 80 animals in half an acre for a day, and they didn't touch this at all. They trampled all the grass around it and left it. So the whole thing of mob grazing and silvopasture just seems to work really well. I see loads of wildlife around the place. Everything kind of just seems to thrive in the whole thing, because the grasses have so many different stages of growth, and mob grazing also helps really well with in a silvopasture situation, because you really don't want the cattle to be trampling around the trees for too long, so they just get a short kind of burst of livestock, and then the livestock move on. So as you can see, what I've been doing, it's early days, and I'm only starting to get establishing these ideas around the farm in the last few years, but I'm excited to see what the results will be, and I'm confident that the advantages will be many, and that it'll bring resilience and profitability to the farm. It may not be the solution to every farm, but I believe it'll future-proof this one. So this is just a little map of what I got done this year. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor moving, but in the middle there's kind of there's 5 red stripes there, those silvopasture stripes I was showing you. These green pockets with the red line around them are pockets of kind of groves of trees. One of those is a glass one, but the others I just stuck in myself. The kind of acidy, yellowy, broad strips are these these browsing strips of willow and poplar and hazel, these kind of short coppicey ones, and everything else, the blues are just drains, but the other green strips then are hedgerows that we've worked on or rejuvenated. And just to show off, actually, I did we dug a pond this year, so I love my pond, and ponds are kind of the sexy thing to do when you're farming for nature now. But in the vein of what I've been talking about, this field has no water in it, so this is going to be the water supply to that field and a couple of fields below it. So we've set up pasture pumps out of it, and that's what's feeding the water there. So it's a really cool resource, and we're having great fun with it too. The kids love it, and we're racing boats in it, and it's full of tadpoles and everything. So it's super. I think that's it. Yeah, I'm at the end. There's just a few books that were inspiration to me, and if anybody's interested more. So, yeah, that's kind of Sarah Flack's book, The Art and Science of Grazing, is excellent. It's really takes on the ideas of holistic management for a more temperate climate, and Steve Gabriel's book on silvopasture is fantastic. So. Cool, that's it. Thanks for listening, and there's all my details there if anyone wants to get in touch. Yeah, you're welcome. Welcome too. We have a chat.
Thanks very much, Clive. If you want to turn on your video there again. Unfortunately, with Clive's system, he's unable to share his screen and see Clive at the same time. But here he is. Clive, thanks a million for that amazing talk. It's really interesting to see like someone really future-proofing their farm, and that's really nice. And as someone mentioned in the question, I hope you actually get to paint still at some stage. But it looks like you're really busy, and also that your cattle are amazing. They're obviously in great condition and amazing poster boy and girls for what you do. So continue on with the good work and with this type of farming. So so thanks. We have quite a few questions for you. So I'll just go to the first one that kind of has popped up on my screen anyway. The question is from Mark Hackett. Do you ever reseed the grassland? If so, what method do you use?
I do, not because I need to, but just because I love tinkering a little bit. So I'm trying a little bit this year. There was an area that was just a little bit depleted in diversity, and I just want to try and experiment with deeper rooting plants, and to get just to see if that has any effect on the iron pan and the compaction as well. So last year we actually planted an acre or a hectare of hemp, and that didn't really work that well. We put that in with a power harrow, and then a guttler, roller and seeder afterwards. This year I'm trying something different. I'm just going round and round. I put the cattle out early, and I bale grazed on a paddock to actually damage the sward that was in it. So I left them there for ages, bale grazing, and this spring worked out so well because it was so dry. So they basically stripped that bare, and they added loads of organic matter and nutrients. And then I kept driving around it with the quad and the chain harrow, and I have a broadcaster, seed broadcaster for the quad. And so yeah, just after the chain harrowing, I broadcast the seed and rolled it in. So I've yet to see if that works or not, but that's what I've tried for this year. So.
Hi, Clive. Thanks for that. There's a couple of questions about stocking density. So there's one question from Kevin Duncan. I was wondering what your stocking density is per paddock within your rotation.
Yeah, this is a common question, and it's a one with a really long-winded, unsatisfying answer. So it changes all the time. Basically, I have a couple of rules that have kind of developed, and firstly, the cattle have to be fed. So there has to be enough grass in the paddock for the cattle to be fed. So I don't measure the stocking density, it's a short answer, but I kind of tried to achieve a couple of markers. So because they're moving every day, or sometimes they're moving twice a day, the worst you can do is make them slightly hungry for a day, or leave too much grass behind for a day. So it's not the biggest deal. They're always nothing's gonna. So I kind of tweak it by eye, and like if when you move them the next day they've grazed underneath the electric fence, then they didn't have enough grass that day. So you kind of give them a little bit more the next day. Or if they don't get a nice trampled effect on the ground, I tighten up the paddock a little bit more. So I just kind of eyeball it. And one thing that has to happen is that the cattle are full. So you can see that by looking at their left-hand side. The rumen is just in front of their hip bone, and there's a little triangle there. And if that's bulging or flat, then their rumens are full. And if it's hollow, they haven't had enough to eat. So if that's hollow, you definitely want to make your paddock bigger. But yeah, so it changes all year, because in the spring I'm moving them really fast. Like there's the rotation that they're currently on, they'll be round in around 30 days, and they're only skimming the top of the grass, so we're leaving loads behind, and hopefully it at this time of year it'll usually have recovered in 30 days. And then the next rotation could be 50 days. So the paddocks will get a little bit smaller and more intense then, because the grass will get longer. So it changes all the time. So that's the I can go on and on, but I think I'll stop.
So Naomi Neems has asked, has mob-grazing taken off in Ireland? Are there many people doing it? And what do you think about the new agroforestry subsidies? Would you use them, or what's your viewpoint on them?
As mob-grazing taken off in Ireland, I think some people are tinkering around with it, and like, yeah, I wouldn't say it's taken off, but there's definitely people interested in it and exploring it a little bit. People are very reluctant for some reason, and people like to have their fields really clean, and I think people seem to have a hang up with leaving a lot of grass behind or trampling a lot of grass and see it as wasted grass, where that kind of really delights me, because I know it's a layer of organic matter for the soil, and if you do it a few times, you just see the feedback loop is really positive, because you grow so much more grass, so you're not really wasting any. But yeah, so that's kind of that. The agroforestry subsidies in Ireland is, yeah, no, it doesn't suit me. There's definitely a very small place for it. I think the people involved aren't that happy with it, and they're hoping to change it. It's based in the forestry department of the agricultural department, and it has a couple of hang-ups, especially for organic farmers. You lose your organic payment on that area of land, because it's an area-based payment, and that area of land is classed as forestry forever, as far as grants go, as well as legally. So that's not really an issue for me, but losing the organic payment, the Agroforestry have claimed the agroforestry payment, so that's one issue. It's quite restrictive in the species of trees and the way the trees are planted, and you're not supposed to graze them afterwards with large livestock, so you're only supposed to use sheep or make hay in the first few years. There's loads of restrictions, and it's all been based on research, but I've just been trying, and very good research, but I've just been trying to figure out ways that it just works for me. I'm just doing it on my own, and I'm just happier to be outside the bounds of any restrictions within a scheme. So
that's very good, because we had a question about agroforestry, so I'm glad you answered that. There's another question by James Toyles. Are the cattle housed during the winter, and how long for if they are? Do you bed down with straw and spread the muck?
Yes, yeah, that's. I was going to have a load of slides on that, but yeah. So we do house, and most years we get that quite a short housing period. So this year it was about 4 months. So we housed around Christmas. With the mob grazing and planning the grazing, you can build up quite a wedge of grass for the end of the season. And if the weather is anyway favourable, you can keep grazing quite late. I had still grass left behind at Christmas, but the weather was getting nasty, so we pulled them out in case they started doing damage, and we've left that grass for the spring. And yeah, we were out in under 4 months this year, but as I said, we were bale grazing in a small area, so they hadn't started the grazing rotation after that 4 months. So I had another month of bale grazing in a small area, but it was outdoors. And this year we bedded down almost completely on rushes. So all that bottom peaty area last summer was really dry. We were able to we got 3 cuts of rushes off it. And but yeah, we've used wood chip, and straw as well. Anything that's cheap and available, basically. But I really like the idea of using the rushes because it's all in farm. It's super cheap, obviously, and it's all enclosed in the bounds of the farm, so I'm not buying in anything. And there is a risk with spreading rush seed, and I compost all my farm yard manure, so it gets turned, and I monitor the heat, and so I try and do thermal composting. Now that's because we've hundreds of tons of the stuff. It doesn't all get properly done, so there are seeds and stuff in it, but the compost piles themselves never grow rushes. So I think although they may have viable seeds, the compost themselves isn't an environment that those seeds want to grow. So, and the thing about rushes, as you may have noticed, I'm not really at war with rushes. Like, I still grow enough grass, even though I have loads of them. But what I'm at war with is the reason the rushes are there. So it's not so much the rushes that I'm worried about. It's more the situation that they like to thrive in, that compacted soil and the kind of acidic conditions that come from that. So I'm not bothered about spreading rush seed, to be honest.
Okay, we have a question here from Liam Lennon. Would you encourage other farmers to start selling directly to the consumer? What's your thoughts on that, Clive?
I would. It's seriously rewarding. Both from a profitability point of view, like you really feel like you're getting paid for the work you do. Like, you're never going to get really rich or anything, but because you're naming the price of your end product and people are willing to pay that, you never feel like you're being screwed. And that in itself, for your own mental health, is brilliant, because you really used to distress me when I was just selling stuff into the market. And I still do have to sell stuff into the market, like cull cows and all that kind of stuff, and animals that aren't suitable for grass finishing and stuff. But in my head, I look at that as culling, and it's just a different thing, and I'm happy enough with that. But yeah, having the end product going to the customer, meeting the customer, learning what a live animal looks like as a carcass, and then how it cuts out for meat, and all those kind of things may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I found it really rewarding that you're actually you're going straight from the birth of that animal right through to the end product. And the way it's changed my goals of breeding and stuff is really cool as well, because I mentioned in the talk that I'm not striving for heavy weanling weights, or like all these things that you try and tick the box when you're feeding into the conventional or just the commodity market. I don't have to tick those. I have to tick the boxes that I want. So I'm trying to get a small, easy fattening carcass that kills out at around 300 kilos, and that has lovely meat and tastes really good. And I'm tinkering around with breeds and using Irish Moilds and all the traditional breeds like Hereford and Angus and everything else, and you get to taste what that animal tastes like compared to that animal and that kind of stuff. And so that's really rewarding. But the actual act of direct selling isn't for everybody. Like, it's definitely another job, and I'm not particularly good at it either. I could be doing a lot more on the marketing end. Yeah, just the social media stuff and everything else. I do enough. I've always got a waiting list, and I'm really happy, but I could be pushing a lot more. And it's hard work. And the one thing I would say is it completely relies on having a good abattoir that you can trust. And I use an abattoir in Grange called G Burn Meats. Jerry Burns is the owner there, and it's a family-run abattoir. His three sons and his wife work in it as well, and they're I can really trust them and work really closely together. And he kind of mentored me through that process of learning what a live animal looks like on the hooks, and what I should be looking for in a live animal, and teaching me that bit that most farmers never get to see. And so that was really cool. But he also he does all the work for me as far as processing goes and bagging. And I go into the abattoir to pick up on the butchering day and collect all the meat, and he's it all processed and laid out the way we've agreed. And all I have to do is pack that into boxes and bring it to the customer. And I know all those boxes are exactly the same, and I can stand behind them to the customer. I don't even have to check them. He's them labeled. He's everything done. So without him being there, I'm not sure I could run the business. So I think if you are going down that road, I just be very sure all those ducks are in a row, and you have an abattoir locally that you can trust, and all those kind of things. So yeah, that was a long answer.
There's two questions I'd like to ask together. One is, did you get much useful advice about what breeds would work best for organic grass-fed animals? That's the first question. And the next one that's related is, do you keep all your weanling or stores? Do you find they all mature together? Your cows are strong. What age can you finish stores at? And is it time of the year? Does it depend on the time of the year? Is that too many questions?
No, I can manage that. No, that's been a huge learning curve, because within every breed there's good and bad animals as well. So I started with Herefords, and I really love Herefords. I love the look of them, and I'm a sucker for things that look nice. So that has led me astray sometimes. But once I got some really nice Hereford genetics, and I used some Hereford AI, and I had a Hereford bull, and I found the animals were getting too big, and they were finishing too big, and the idea of this traditional Hereford cow that was in my head is very hard to select for now. The genetics have been pushed a lot bigger in they've basically tried to compete with convention or continental cattle. So and I found a lot of them very hard calving as well. And I'm very good friends with my vet, but his boss was out at my house one time, and when I told him I was getting into Herefords, he said, "Oh, don't even think of it. Just stick with Angus, stick with Angus." And I didn't listen to him at the time, and I went through the whole Hereford thing, and I just found it really difficult. And I still have lovely cows. I'm still a sucker for Herefords, but I did find them a real struggle to get the kind of genetics I wanted, and to finish young and with buttery fat. They tend to get very tall in the back legs, and they were possible to finish, and you end up culling them then after you've spent 25 months rearing them, expecting them to be finished beef, and you're just never going to finish them on grass. So I had a Shorthorn then for a while, and had similar trouble with the Shorthorns, although I also still love Shorthorns. And then I got an Angus bull, and everything came together. And but there's if you look on say Dundee or something at Angus bulls, every bull is a different genotype. There's big rangy ones, there's little butty ratty ones, and ones that I really like. So within every breed there's different types of animals, and you just have to find the type that works in your model and breed for that. And I've introduced little bits of Galloway, and you may have seen one of the pictures there. That animal came from my vet, actually, with the horns. He's a Highland Shorthorn cross. So like, I do a lot of tinkering, but I focus now on the type rather than the breed. So I've got my eye in on the kind of type of animal I want. And sometimes I get it wrong. I'm not the best judge of cattle, but as I said earlier, going through the whole process and seeing them finished, I've started to see the type of animal I want. So that was definitely a learning curve for me, because I came from a dairy farm and I had no idea what beef animals should look like in the first place. And a lot of my initial cow herd and my selection for animals at the start were quite dairy-ish looking, because that was what I perceived as a good animal. So that's all changed now, thankfully. And yeah, so that's what was the other two bits of the question at the end?
Was it what age do you finish them?
Yeah, so that varies. I usually get them done before 30 months, and but because I'm not selling into the factory, I don't really need to reach that target. But just out of efficiency, it's nice to get them done before 30 months. I've also found, as far as meat quality goes, beyond the 30 months kind of region, it can tend to get a little bit tougher, but the flavor intensity increases. So you're kind of tossing between those two things, and around 30 months seems to work really well for grass finish animals. But the last one I finished was 26 months. So again, a lot of that's the genetics. Some of it's the time of year and the quality of the grass at that time. I have been staggering my calving, so that I had the bull with the cows all the time, and so the calving was spread across the whole summer, and they pretty much all calve on their own, and I don't intervene very much. But yeah, so that meant that there was animals finishing all around. But I've decided that we had actually quite a tough year this year. We had cryptosporidium in our calving shed, and so we had a lot of sickness earlier on in the year. And so to alleviate that in the future, I had hoped last year actually to go to full summer calving this year, and this has kind of focused my mind to do that. So I'll be calving nothing in the shed next year. I'll make sure they're all out. And so at the moment the bull is isolated from the herd, and he'll be joining them probably in August. And yeah, so next year it'll be full outdoor calving, because if you think about it, as far as livestock habitats go, a bedded shed, no matter how clean you keep it, is no place to be to be given birth, because you're literally on a stack of the excrement of your herd. And so when they're outdoors, it's such a clean environment. They're a lot hardier. They get acclimatized to the fluctuations in the weather a lot quicker, and it's in sync with nature again. Like the deer calve down in early summer, and it's when the grass is just coming to that high energy stage where the cows can get all the protein from the milk and or from the grass and give it to the calves. So it just fits. It's a lot easier. But yeah, no, again, I think I try to spread out the finishing as much as possible. And so I'm gonna have a broad calving period from early summer right through till autumn, and the calves then will spread out throughout the year as far as finishing goes. I've been trying to, just for cash flow, I've been trying to finish one every month or two some months, and yeah, it keeps customers happy as well, because at the start I was only finishing from say May through till maybe November, or maybe one in December, and then that was it. There was nothing for the whole winter. But this winter I managed to leave some grass, and I was grazing a small amount of finishing animals all winter, and they came in for a little while, but they had access to grass at any period that the weather was a little bit better. And yeah, so I finished one early in January this year, and another one in yeah, I've basically done one every month this year so far. So yeah, another long answer.
Looking at all the questions, we have so many questions, and apologies to everyone, because it's 9 o'clock already, and we're going to have to say just finish it here. And thank you so much, Clive. Wonderful presentation and all your answers. So thank you for taking the time. You're obviously a very busy man. Just to let our attendees know that thank you for coming today, turning up this evening. Our next webinar next Wednesday is a geology one. We are looking into unlocking the mysterious geology of the Burren and what the rocks of the Burren tell us about how they were formed and what has happened to them since. So our speaker is Colin Bunce, who is a geologist, and he has been working in the Burren for the last 30 years as an activity instructor and a field tutor in the Burren, and he's also discovered a few cave systems. So it should be a very interesting talk. I hope that we'll see you all again next Wednesday. Bridget, is there anything you'd like to say, or will we?
Yeah, reiterate. Thanks a million, Clive. It's lovely to see such creativity on a farm, and you know, you're obviously being very innovative and hopefully inspiring to lots of other people who have joined us tonight. So thanks a million for that. And yeah, we'll see you all again next week. Thank you.
Cool.
Goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invite again. Bye.